a man who I think has a less biased view about Mandela. Alex Newman is the foreign correspondent at the New American and a reporter for the great website WND. Alex, welcome to the Savage Nation.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So the last caller was very negative on Mandela. He called him a Timothy McVeigh. You wouldn't characterize him like that, would you?
You know, it's difficult to say things like that about a person who's died now, but I think at the same time we have a responsibility to the truth to acknowledge what he did. I mean, you know, Obama compared him to the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers fought like honorable men as troops against other troops. What Mandela and his people were engaged in was nothing of the sort. This was terrorism. This was killing women and children, primarily blacks, ironically. And I mean that.
Wait, I don't understand that. Why would Mandela's ANC and their violent gang? Why would they target other black people?
Well, I mean, the image that's been created about South Africa at this point is so different from the reality on the ground. I lived there for some time. I'm very familiar with South Africa, and I mean, okay, so Mandela was a communist. This has now been admitted by the South African Communist Party, by the ANC. And these acts of terrorism, why were they perpetrated against blacks? Well, the biggest reason is because blacks did not support the takeover or the communist takeover of South Africa. They did not.
So you mean the black residents in South Africa who didn't want to go in that direction were then targeted by Mandela and his goons?
That's exactly right. I mean, the ANC, you know, it wasn't always a communist organization. It was kind of taken over in 1928 is when it started happening. But, I mean, there was huge constituencies of blacks opposed to the ANC. So we don't need to defend apartheid to say that, you know, what Mandela did, what his people did, was terrorism. I mean, you can talk about fighting an oppressive system, that's fine. But when you bring it to killing women and children, when you bring it to this thing they called necklacing, Winnie Mandela, his ex-wife, used to boast about how we were going to liberate South Africa.
Yeah, now that's very important. His wife, was she imprisoned for her necklacing, Winnie Mandela? This woman, I was shocked to see, has been rehabilitated and was at the funeral. She was an open advocate for one of the most brutal murder tactics ever conceived by man, you write. Pioneered by the African National Congress, the so-called necklacing involved filling a tire with gasoline before putting it around the victim's neck, setting it ablaze, and watching the poor target slowly writhe in horrifying agony before eventual death. Most of the ANC's necklace victims were fellow blacks. That's unbelievable. Was she ever jailed for this?
No, she wasn't, and it's all documented in the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. I mean, this is well-documented fact that she participated in these murders, she encouraged these murders, they were directed at blacks. I mean, one of them was a 14-year-old girl, and now she's still on the leadership committee of the ANC. So I mean, to suggest that these people are some kind of freedom fighters like our founding fathers, I think is very, very dishonest, and Obama really is...
Well, let's look at this from a different perspective. When he took power, forget about his past. He could have engaged in a bloodbath and a mass slaughter in South Africa along the lines of Zimbabwe's Mugabe, couldn't he?
I suppose he could have, yeah, but I mean, I don't think it's a reasonable... I've heard a lot of people using this defense of Mandela, saying, well, he didn't exterminate the whites when he took power. I mean, first of all, that assumes that that's a normal, logical thing to do.
I'm sorry, right. That's true. That does follow as a possible logical follow, yes.
And I mean, what you know, he did step down as his first term, as you mentioned when the last caller was on, but he knew, he was secure in the knowledge that his minions and the people he was working with, the South African Communist Party, the ANC, all of which were backed by the Soviet Union, by Mao in communist China. These are some of the biggest mass murderers in the history of the world.
Mao Zedong praised Nelson Mandela?
Are you kidding? The ANC went over to Beijing and personally met with Mao Zedong and with the people in Moscow, and they all...
Oh, my God. Mao Zedong was the worst butcher of the last century. Over 30 million fellow Chinese were killed by that madman.
That's right. And see, this is the history that people don't know. And it's important that people do know this history. And I think it also says something about the times we're living in here. Like you said, they're making him into a saint. But reality is so far away from this image. So if the media can pull this off, I mean, what can't they pull off? What else?
That's right. That is absolutely what worries me. if they can make Mandela into a saint and they can let Obama get away with posing for a selfie at a funeral and say that the woman, the Danish prime minister did it, not him, they can do anything. They can twist anything. They can make reality unreality. They can make hate love, love hate, war peace, peace love, the truth lies and the lies truth. So let's talk about some more of the truths about this gentleman, Nelson Mandela. Today the president did something astonishing. He ordered American flags to be flown at half-mast until Monday with an executive order. Is that shocking?
I think it's a disgrace, and people don't even seem to be realizing the significance of this. We are honoring a guy who was a communist and who was a terrorist. He admitted, he confessed to 156 public acts of violence, including the Church Street bombings. They put bombs and they killed 19 people, women and children, injured another 200. And now our flags are flying at half-mast to acknowledge an admitted communist and an admitted terrorist. So, we don't have to rip Mandela apart, but it's important that people know the truth about this stuff. And now our flags are flying at half-mast. So,
so let me ask you protocol. Is it typical, is it traditional for American flags to be ordered to fly at half-mast when a world leader dies, or is this a unique situation?
I've never heard of it happening before, so...
Okay, that's interesting. We'll have to research that. Mandela was not an American. I don't know what the flags are at half-staff for. Not everybody likes communists in America. But you know what's an even bigger story to me, Alex Newman? We're speaking with Alex Newman, foreign correspondent at the New American, reporter for WorldNet Daily, and we'll learn more about what's going on in South Africa today, Jacob Zuma, the fourth leader of the so-called Rainbow Nation, etc. What's even more interesting to me is I would gauge, reading what I see going on, do you think that the young people in the world even know who Nelson Mandela is?
No, they don't. They have this entirely fictional image of the man, and they pull little quotes here and there to make him seem like a good guy, but they have no idea about the history of this guy. They don't know who he was. They don't know what he did. Sometimes people just, when you explain to them who he was, they don't even believe it until they go out and research it themselves. But this is all on the record. This is all in the historical record. There's no speculation here.
I don't want to play devil's advocate, but the truth is that if you were a black man in Africa at his time and you felt strongly about freedom, wouldn't you have joined him?
No, for several reasons. The first being what we just discussed. I don't think murder of women and children is appropriate under any circumstances. I'm not somebody who subscribes to the idea that the ends justify the means, so I don't think...
Okay, that's very important to say.
...these kinds of acts. And I think it's, most people don't really know what apartheid was either. So I don't think it's good to defend apartheid. I don't think it was a good system. It was, I think, in many ways a racist system and an oppressive system. But at the same time, the UN declared it to be a crime against humanity. This was a resolution introduced by the Soviet Union and immediately supported by all the communist mass murderers of the world. So what was... You
mean the same communist mass murderers who now say Israel is an apartheid state worse than Nazi Germany?
Yeah, and that's another example of this kind of ridiculous extremism. Apartheid was not a nice system. I'm not going to defend it. But at the same time, I think it's important to keep it in perspective. One of the goals, and people might agree with this, people might not, but one of the goals of the apartheid system, and this is part of the historical record again, was to grant independence to all these different African groups. So, South Africa is a lot of different tribes and ethnicities, the Afrikaners, the descendants of the Dutch being one. And the idea was, we'll create these independent homelands for all these different groups. 4 of the groups had already achieved full sovereignty by the time apartheid was coming down. The most horrible elements of the system were being...
What was apartheid? Can you explain it in a few sentences? What was apartheid?
Literally, it means just separate development. The idea was that, the Xhosas can stay by themselves and rule themselves, the Zulus. A lot of these tribes have been warring with each other for a very long time, way before, Europeans came and did anything 300-400 years ago. And so the idea was, separate development. We'll keep the Xhosas, they can have their own kingdom, the Zulus can have their own kingdom, and the idea was to create 11 different homelands for all these different tribes. And part of the system was, quite oppressive. So black people weren't able to, for example, start businesses. They weren't able to marry a white woman, for example. So you had a lot of really oppressive, race-based, racist legislation like this. And I don't think it's something that should be defended. But at the same time, I mean, when people draw comparisons to what Hitler did, for example, or what Stalin did, it's not even in the same ballpark. I mean, we're talking about apples to oranges here. Apartheid wasn't good, but and nothing.
It wasn't as bad as. I get it, Alex. I have another question for you. Who are the historic occupants of the land known as South Africa today? Before the white farmers, the Dutch farmers came there, who was residing there?
See, that you just hit on another really important point, and this is another big part of the myth that's been created surrounding the whole South African narrative. South Africa, when the Europeans started arriving there 400, 500 years ago, was pretty desolate. I mean, the first census records we have from the 1800s showed 1 million whites and 1 million blacks. And even during apartheid, you had blacks fleeing from all over the rest of Africa, partly, admittedly, because there was communist terrorist regimes ruling their countries. So they were fleeing to South Africa. They were fleeing into apartheid. And, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm defending apartheid, but if you look at what's been going on in Africa for the last 100 years, apartheid probably had the best human rights record of any government on the continent. They had rule of law, they had fair courts, et cetera.
Well, you mean compared with the surrounding nations. But I want to go again to 400 or 500 years ago. Was this occupied by tribes, or was it a desolate, unoccupied area for some reason?
When the Europeans started arriving there, the Dutch and the French, it was mostly Bushmen who lived around there. And then some of the tribes started migrating south from, Central Africa, near the area of Uganda. So the tribes started migrating south. And then maybe 100, a little bit more years ago, they started coming faster because South Africa was developing very quickly. There was jobs, there was employment opportunities, there wasn't communist terror regimes or warlords running everything. And so, I mean, they had, the blacks there had the highest income on the continent by far. They had income.
Wow. You wouldn't know that listening
anywhere in the world, with the exception.
You certainly wouldn't know that looking at the American media. We're speaking with Alex Newman, is the foreign correspondent at the New American Reporter for WND. When we come back, we'll talk about the current situation in South Africa for blacks and for whites, right here on the Savage Nation. I'll be right back.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-SAVAGE, 855-400-7282. Savage.
And while I will always fall short of Madiba's example, he makes me want to be a better man. He speaks to what's best inside us after this great liberator is laid to rest. And when we've returned to our cities and villages and rejoined our daily routines, let us search for his strength. Let us search for his largeness of spirit somewhere inside of ourselves.
Would Mandela have taken a selfie with a BlackBerry of him and a blonde lady at a funeral for another world leader? I don't know. I kind of doubt it. If Mandela had gone to the funeral of another world leader, would he ever have been caught smiling with a blonde while his wife was sitting next to him? I would expect that Winnie would have necklaced the other woman, but let's put that aside. It's an embarrassment. It's disrespectful, and we paid for that trip. It is a nightmare that's getting worse. Let's take a quick caller and then go back to Alex Newman. Aaron in San Diego, welcome to the Savage Nation. Make your point, please.
Sure. Thanks for having me on the show. You'd mentioned earlier that you had worked and educated yourself out of poverty. I think what you missed there is that blacks in South Africa at that time didn't have the opportunity to work their way out or educate their way out.
Okay, do people in America today have the opportunity to work their way out of poverty, or they're stuck in it?
No, I think most people absolutely do.
Okay, I just wanted to know where you were coming from. Let's go to Alex. Alex, how would you answer Aaron's statement that blacks at that time had no chance to work their way out of poverty? Is that a rational statement, a reasonable statement?
Well, first of all, it's untrue. Again, I don't want to defend apartheid. I don't think apartheid was a good system. I heard it described today as socialism for blacks and capitalism for whites, and I think that's a good description. But the fact is, before apartheid fell, you had not a huge number, but you had a sizable number of blacks who actually earned above the average income of whites. And I was just on the phone today with the head of the Free Market Foundation in Johannesburg, and he was an anti-apartheid activist. He hated the system. He wants liberty. And he was explaining this to me. He's a very honest man, and And that's the case. It wasn't a good system. I wouldn't defend it. I wouldn't dream of defending it. But it's just flat out untrue that blacks were permanently stuck in their misery. Again, I don't think it was a good system. It's probably good that it fell. I don't know that what replaced it is better.
Alex, what's coming in South Africa now that Mandela is gone? Is it going to revert to the barbarism of Zimbabwe?
It's a good question, and you get really different answers depending on who you talk to. But I think probably one of the world's foremost authorities, Dr. Gregory Stanton, he's the head of Genocide Watch, probably one of the most respected experts on genocide in the world, if not the top expert. He went on a fact-finding mission last year, and this is really what sealed the deal for me. And when he said this, I knew my suspicions were correct, and the suspicions of a lot of other people were correct. There is a movement, there is an organized effort in South Africa right now among extremists, communists, black nationalists, and others to exterminate the white population. They have friends in very high places, and I think framing this as a racial issue is not a good idea. This isn't just, blacks hate whites because they were former oppressors, etc. This is really part of a broader agenda, and that is to impose total tyranny on South Africa, total communist tyranny. But I do think that the whites there have...
Where are the nuclear weapons that South Africa currently possesses? Who's in charge of them?
My understanding is that they were dismantled before 1994, beforehand.
Alex, could you stay over the top of the hour to continue our discussion of South Africa today?
Absolutely.
All right. Alex Newman, foreign correspondent, New American, reporter for WND. More on the truth about Mandela and South Africa.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-7282. Warning. The Savage Nation contains adult language, adult content, psychological nudity. Listener discretion is advised. And now, America's most exciting radio talk show, The Savage Nation, home of borders, language, culture. And here he is, Michael Savage.
And like America's founding fathers, he would erect a constitutional order to preserve freedom for future generations, a commitment to democracy and rule of law, ratified not only by his election, but by his willingness to step down from power after only one term.
Oh, if only you had followed Mandela's lead. God, we'd be in a better shape. Anybody but Obama. To take a selfie there at the funeral, basically gushing over a blonde leader of another country while his wife sits grimly looking at the services. It's unbelievable. It says everything. We're talking about the funeral for Nelson Mandela and the disgrace that Obama has made of himself and for America in his behaving like an adolescent child at a funeral. It's unbelievable to me. We're talking about him shaking the hands with the Hitler of Cuba. Make no mistake about it. You may think that this is just high-flying rhetoric, that Raul Castro's a nice old guy in a nice suit. He's a murderer. He is a murderer. He runs a prison camp. The Cubans in Cuba live in a prison camp. And Obama took the time to shake his hand. Today, Obama, through an executive order, ordered that all flags in America fly at half-staff, which is shocking when you think about it. He didn't order the flags at half-staff for the 22 Navy SEALs who were executed in Afghanistan, but he orders the flags at half-staff for a non-American. It's really unbelievable. In a moment, we'll go back to our guest, Alex Newman, who's the foreign correspondent for the New American and reporter for WND, to talk about the crime in South Africa today, its relativity, and where it might go tomorrow, where people may look back and say, I wish Mandela was here to keep things under control, because that's what I think is going to happen. As flawed as Mandela's legacy may be, not in a strange way, but in a very real way, he may have kept the cork in the bottle, is what I see coming. That's what I think could happen, is the cork will come out of the bottle right now. Okay, 855-400-7282. 855-400-7282. Cyril on WFTL in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. You're actually in Naples, but you're listening on FTL. Cyril, welcome to the Savage Nation.
I was born in northern Rhodesia, but I lived in Cape Town from 1935 until 1947. And I could see the writing on the wall at that point.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Many people saw the handwriting on the wall in Germany and got out. Let's jump to today, Cyril. Do you feel the same handwriting on the wall in America?
Yes.
To be very blunt, you're not alone.
I am. I carry a gun. I don't take any chances, even in Naples.
You mean in Naples, Florida, not in Naples, Italy?
Yeah.
I think even the Napoli Don carry guns in Naples.
Yeah. I was in Kenya for the Mau Mau and saw what happened there.
Oh, the Whistlers. The Whistlers with the machetes.
Oh, yeah. I have a wound on my hip from that.
Now, how old were you at the time that the insurrections occurred in Kenya?
I was 19.
Were you in the army, or were you just a civilian attacked by the mobs?
Yeah, we got attacked one night. We took Alto, and
well, you could go to Brooklyn, New York, and get attacked if you'd like, or Oakland, California. Wouldn't be much different.
I lived in New York for a while too.
No, go to Brooklyn. Maybe you'll be the victim of a game called Knockout. It's not done with machetes, of course, or machine guns. There's no whistles involved, but it's sort of on the same order. It's, even dwarfs started small.
Was this country much better? I was paid to go into the Congo to harass the United Nations. I also know for a fact that Hammarskjöld did not have an accident. He was shot.
Oh, the old United Nations leader, Dag Hammarskjöld, when his plane went down. Very few people remember that incident.
Yeah, I was there.
Well, what were you, in the army?
I was in the army at the time.
Which army, Cyril?
The Rhodesian Nyasaland Army.
So you were in Rhodesia before it became Zimbabwe, before Mugabe took it over and took the farms away from whites and gave them to other folks. And, of course, it was a food exporting nation. When the white farmers were farming it, it's an uncomfortable fact. Today, the country is a basket case.
Yes, completely.
But that doesn't stop the internationalists from saying it's still a better place because people have fairness now. See, they put, quote, fairness above starvation.
No fairness.
I think the same rhetoric is being heard in America today, where everything is calculated by the slide rule called fairness. Irrespective of the results, what's important is that there is, quote, fairness.
There isn't. There's one
look, we get the picture, and I don't know, Cyril, I don't know if we can survive as a free nation with 3 more years of this character in the White House. That's the absolute truth, and this applies to people of all races. This is not aimed at white people. It's aimed at all Americans who once thought they were free to choose whether it be a health care system. They could choose whether they wanted it or not. Now the dictator has said you must have it. This is the same character who talks about freedom in highfalutin terms at a funeral in Africa and then is overseeing the equivalent of the Stasi from the ex-Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, here in the United States of America, and does nothing to rein them in. No, Cyril, these are not good times. Let's go back right now to Alex Newman, foreign correspondent at the New American, reporter for WND. Alex, welcome back to the program. You heard the last caller talking about his view of things. He goes back a long, long way. Are you pessimistic about what might happen in South Africa going forward?
To give my honest opinion, yes, I am. I mean, the way things are shaping up, it doesn't look good. You have, the president openly singing songs calling for the mass murder of whites, of Boers.
Now, wait, which president? Where?
Oh, all of them. Mandela used to sing it. Then you have Zuma nowadays. He still sings it. It's even officially hate speech. It's an incitement to genocide by any standard. And they go to political rallies and they sing, shoot the Boer, shoot the farmer, bring me my machine gun, as if it's just fun and games. And, people dismiss it as, oh, it's just an old struggle song. They don't really want to exterminate the whites. But I think when people say they want to exterminate somebody, history shows us that we should take it seriously.
What are crime statistics in South Africa today? We know this, and it's an embarrassment, and we can't blame any one individual for this. Isn't South Africa still the child rape capital of the world? It's a terrible thing to say, but correct me if I'm mistaken in saying that.
It is the capital of a lot of horrible things, including rape and murder. I think it's number 2 in murders worldwide, but it's often called the murder capital of the world. And yes, child rape is very widespread. Rape of women is extremely widespread. And it affects all races, of course. Blacks killing blacks, blacks killing whites, coloreds are targets regularly. So it's really a universal problem. But what's happening there with the Afrikaners, I think, deserves special attention from Americans especially, but the whole world. And because what we're really talking about here is the extermination of a people, of a nation, and a nation actually that has a lot of similarities with ours. The Afrikaner people, they're different in some respects from Americans, but we have a lot of similarities in common. They were very Christian. They fled persecution in Europe. They fought mightily against the British Empire. They refused to be subjects. They have so many parallels in their history with ours. And right now, what's happening to them right now is horrible, horrible, horrible. And nobody wants to talk about it. And the government tries to cover it up.
Alex, I read in the L.A. Times, not in your writings, that there are hundreds of thousands of economically deprived Afrikaners. Those would be white people, correct? Hundreds of thousands of them living in squalid squatter camps throughout South Africa without so much as running water or electricity. Is that true?
That's 100% true, and it's getting worse.
That there are hundreds of thousands of white Afrikaners living in squalor and squatter camps without water or electricity? I never even knew that until today.
Yep, some estimates suggest up to 1 million. But
I guess that didn't make it to the UN's Human Rights Commission. 90% of the farms it had redistributed from whites who farmed the land for generations were given to blacks with little knowledge of farming. This is from the L.A. Times. Almost 25,000 square miles of land so far are now failing. The farms, which are active accruing revenue for the state, were handed over to people, and more than 90% of those are not functional, said Land Reform Minister Gugiel Quinty. So the fact of the matter is things could get very, very much worse there.
Yeah, they're bad already. Nobody wants to talk about it. I would recommend people look into the investigation that Genocide Watch did on their fact-finding mission last year. What's going on there? I won't even describe the horrors that are happening to some of these white farmers. These are not, just regular crimes like the regime wants to suggest. These are, things so monstrous, I don't think normal people can even conceive of these things. Murdering babies in the most horrific ways imaginable. And this is very widespread now. The government tries to cover it up, and they're failing. But I think...
But you would think with the whole world in South Africa, with the whole world eulogizing Nelson Mandela, perhaps even one news outlet would let one story come out about these things that we are talking about tonight? Are we not allowed to talk about these things on the Savage Nation? Is there something wrong with exposing the realities of South Africa in the midst of the whole world looking at the country today?
It makes you wonder what the real agenda is, doesn't it?
It makes you sort of fear for the future of this country that we have no press. But that's an old story on this country. Especially when, and I'm going to tell you this, Alex, I'm the only one talking about it. All of the others on the so-called conservative side of the media are obsessed with Obamacare, while these issues of genocide and crime are not even being discussed.
It seems very politically incorrect to talk about it. A lot of people even try to justify it. They say, well, the Afrikaners did apartheid, and so then it's fine to exterminate them and to rape them and to disembowel them. And to
yes, but there are members of these Azteca movements here in the United States of America, or La Raza, who say the same things about the Europeans living in California, New Mexico, Arizona, and elsewhere. They say, well, you stole the land from our Native American ancestors. Anything that happens to you is justified.
And the same with the new Black Panthers who were in South Africa last year. In the U.S., they talk about exterminating the whites. They talk about exterminating the whites in South Africa. They were there getting some sort of training from Mugabe in Zimbabwe last year. So there's a lot going on here that people need to think about, and the media is not going to tell you about this until they're forced to. So I would recommend that people start doing their own research and start looking at what is happening here.
Is there anyone listening to the program this evening, and we're going to finish this up at the bottom of the hour and move on to another topic, which is the danger of the mandatory flu vaccine that the mayor, the Napoleonic mayor of New York, Mr. Bloomberg, has taken upon himself to impose upon the people, despite all of the evidence to the contrary. We'll move on to that at the bottom of the hour. If there are any callers who lived in South Africa or have something to say, whether it's pro or con Mandela, the phone number is 855-400-7282 on the program. Let's take one quick caller. Joe on line 4. Neil, put that up for me because if I hit it, I'm liable to lose my guest. Line 4. Joe, what's on your mind from the Internet?
Michael, let me just say this as a veteran. I'm a retired Army officer, formerly with the Joint Chiefs.